What's going on, Alana?
Hey, Brendan, how's it going?
I am doing amazing. How about yourself?
I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thanks for coming to hang out at Filmmakers Academy.
Of course.
And for everyone that doesn't know Alana Maiello, she's an amazing friend, filmmaker, director, producer, based in Los Angeles. And thank you so much for stopping by today.
Of course. I love being here. This is like a content factory. I feel like there's just like films, videos, podcasts popping out of this place. Like, I love the vibe here. It's great.
Yeah, we definitely try to make it a revolving door of people. We want the community to continue to grow.
Yeah.
So, let's dive into it. I know that you've had a lot going on. What's your schedule look like with work these days? What have you been up to?
Yeah, actually, it's crazy how much things changed after the pandemic. I think that like everything kind of opened up for me. I started post-production on my film Chewed Gum in February of 2020. And this was like a month before we went in lockdown. And so for the last 2 years, I've been in post-production. And there was like a time where I was just editing at home. There wasn't really leaving the house, just like everyone. In the last 6 months, things got really busy in LA. And I started doing production management for HBO Max, which has been incredible. I love going on set and doing...
And HBO Max is one of the biggest streamers right now. I feel like all content, not that Netflix isn't still the king of the game, but I feel like HBO Max came in. They're really showing their dominance in the fact that you're getting to work with all of these great filmmakers. I know you were working with Jonathan Nolan on some stuff without giving too much away, but that's like extremely exciting.
Oh yeah, I mean, as a documentary director and producer, I started in HBO. And so kind of going along now with HBO Max and doing the production management, I've been working on The Flight Attendant, Westworld, Barry, a new show with The Weeknd called The Idol. And it's my favorite thing to be able to listen to these showrunners and these actors talk about their vision and their craft. I mean, there's no like better way to continue the filmmaking learning journey than listen to these people.
Absolutely.
So it's honestly, I am so lucky for my like gig work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I want to paint
so
the audience. I think it's really cool for you, and we talked about this a little bit, where you're an interesting filmmaker. So many filmmakers, and not to say that there's a right or wrong path in this career, because there is no right or wrong path. But what's beautiful about you is you didn't start wanting to be a filmmaker. And I'd love to like illustrate what your upbringing was like and how that eventually became something that you wanted to use to start talking about stories a little bit later in your life, where say most people would go to film school and that wasn't the path for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think like the way that I want to sum it up before I get started is like filmmaking is a lifelong journey. You know, whatever age that you come into it, it's going to be, when you start, you can't predict what you're going to find, and you're going to have to be flexible. So whether you come into it when you're 5 years old, like Christopher Nolan probably was, you know, or you're 20, 30, 50, like there's going to be so many things along your path that you're going to have to be flexible with. You're going to have to encounter so many different situations that sometimes that life experience can be helpful. But anyways, what I wanted to say was filmmaking is a lifelong journey, no matter what age you get into it. And I think what was interesting for me is there's like this notion I think it's more in American culture where it's like to be the artist is kind of a privileged career, right? And I think a lot of people kind of give the advice to people. I think a lot of people give the advice, oh, like, why don't you do something safe? Like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a dentist, you know? And I got a lot of that when I was growing up. And you know, I was a very like obedient girl, and so I wanted to please the people around me. And like my high school, there was a lot of like competition with going to an Ivy League college and going to law school.
Were you surrounded by a lot of other artists? Because no one else in your family, right? None of them are creatives. I mean, your one sister, Michelle, she's in marketing, so it stems in some form of creativity. But out of all of your siblings and your parents, you're the one that's trying to do it more as like a director in film.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, so when I was really little, my like most vibrant memories, I was obsessed with Phantom of the Opera. Mm-hmm. And I would listen to that tape. I got this cassette tape and I listened to it hundreds of times. And there was something about like the story that I just loved. And I would watch the ballet. I got this ballet, Giselle, and then I loved Cinderella. Like I really liked these like softer, delicate types of stories. Not that Phantom of the Opera is delicate in any way. It's very moody and dark. But like that stuck with me for a long time. But again, like I was saying, is like I was never really encouraged to consider that for a career. Movies were always a part of my family's culture, but it was like the special thing we did as a family. You know, like my dad would take us to the movies and it would be like the time that we would get to hang out with him. There was a time when I was like 11 and I begged my dad to go take me to see Forrest Gump. And I was like, Daddy, you have to let me see this movie. I was just begging him because his cousin was actually a driver for Tom Hanks, interestingly enough. So he was in the movie, my Uncle Polly. And I was like, please take me to see this movie. It's rated R. I know I'm not allowed to see it. My mother wouldn't let me, but Dad, you have to take me. And so I went, and I have such a visceral memory of seeing that movie because, I mean, I was 11, 12, something like that. And I remember that feeling of seeing Forrest and Bubba in Vietnam and just like watching Bubba die in his arms. And it just like struck me so hard because I'd never seen anything like that in my entire life as a little kid, you know? And like, that's probably my earliest experience with like what cinema can do and how it can inform a person of what happens in the world. And like, it was emotional education.
And at that time, were you tangibly considering filmmaking, or was it still just, oh, this is something that I enjoy and it's not something that I can do? Because I remember when I was growing up, I wasn't around. I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember seeing Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. And after that film concluded, I had to have been in kindergarten. So what is that, like 8 or something? I'm like, that is what I want to do. But I was not surrounded by the film industry whatsoever. So you're like, oh, I want to do that, but it's more of a dream. But I always wanted to be in film. Back then when you saw Forrest Gump, did you declare that you wanted to be in film, or is that something that developed a little bit later after you recognized the importance of cinema?
It came later. I think that was one of my first biggest moments where I realized how magical it was and I mean, the memory is still so strong with me. And I think like the next memory that I have where like I really recognize the power of cinema that I still go back to today is seeing Silence of the Lambs. Like when I was like 14 years old, I somehow bought that DVD and I would play it on my laptop at night when my parents, you know, after they put me to bed. And I showed it to my sister Michelle. It freaked her out. She was 10. But I loved the mystery, the intrigue, the investigation. I'd never seen anything like that. It's like when you're a person living your life and you put on a movie, you're transported to a totally different world. And so even though I didn't start wanting to be a filmmaker, I feel very lucky that I had these experiences that taught me what it's supposed to feel like as an audience member, you know, that emotional connection to these stories and characters. And I mean, it stayed with me until now. And I think like, you know, I went to college, I went to BYU, I majored in English. So I was interested in writing and I was interested in story. But again, a lot of my peers at BYU, they were going into accounting or finance. And that's actually where I ended up. I got a job at Goldman Sachs of all places as an English major. And I'm kind of the person where I like to touch the fire. I need to figure out something that doesn't work for me instead of, you know, making a different decision. And so I had to dive into that finance world to know that it wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for that experience because at Goldman, I learned a lot about like numbers, and it was a huge learning curve, a lot about relationships and networking. I actually think Goldman is what gave me all of my producing skills, to be totally honest. But I was there for 3 years, and after about 3 years, I remember sitting at my desk, and I was like drowning in these spreadsheets, just like numbers all over. And I was working in the derivatives department, so it was like these equity derivatives where, you know, you're calling an option on the price of the standard, I don't even remember, oh my, you're calling an option on the price of oil. Something like that. These things that don't even exist. But that was my life, numbers. And I remember sitting there surrounded by these Excel spreadsheets, and I was just starving for stories. It was like something within me like felt empty, you know, and I felt like I'm not in the right place. I have to do something where I can tell stories. And so that's kind of when I knew, and this is when I was 28 at this time. And so I was pretty late in my career. Like I was pretty established in finance. Like I had a track that I could go on. But I was like, there is something missing in my life and I have to go find it. And so I saved my money, I quit Goldman, and I was like, it was actually around this time that I decided that I wanted to make this feature film. This was in like 2015. My film Chewed Gum. And I was like, I know I have to tell this story specifically, but I'm not exactly sure how. And so I decided to move back to Los Angeles, and I was going to discover what form of storytelling I was going to use to tell this particular story for this feature film.
And that's amazing. And what I love about that story, and why I wanted you to start talking about how you had 28 years of life prior to declaring that I want to be a filmmaker, whether it's narrative, documentary, you were living a life. And something that I always try to talk to other filmmakers about, which I think is really important, especially if you're a director, is you have to live life, or then you're not going to have something to actually tell a story about. Because you can feel this sense of emulation that comes from filmmaking, where they love what like Fincher did, or these great filmmakers, but they're not looking at their own life and emotions to be able to apply that. Not that you need to replicate and do semi-autobiographical pieces, that's not always the case, but there's a sense of hardship in life that always has to be embedded into work, or then it doesn't make it personal. And that's just my personal philosophy. Someone might step at that and say something different, but I really do think as a director you have to have a connection, an emotional connection, whether it's thematically speaking or execution based, that you can embed into the project. And that's what I love about the work that you do, is you come at it from a place, and it's inspiring, because someone that's 28 who doesn't know what to do in their life, but they love the idea of filmmaking. You're never too late to really be a filmmaker. I'm even look at Steve McQueen, one of the greatest directors today. I don't think he started making his first film until he was in his 30s. Sure, he was an artist before that, so maybe you could make the case that he was working in a similar career path. But even still, I believe Ava DuVernay was the same way. She didn't start picking up a camera and directing her first feature until she was in her 30s as well. It's a medium where there is that level of potential. And I think people always want to be the Quentin Tarantino at 25 having their first feature film, or the Xavier Dolan who was like 18 with his first feature film going to Cannes. That's just not always going to be the case, and you can't look at other people's careers to expect that it needs to be that way. There needs to be a maturity that comes out of someone to really be able to tackle a film. And that's what I love about your stories. It showed that you became to this place of maturity, and then you moved into, even before Chewed Gum, which is Esfuerzo. And to give a little bit more backstory, Alana and I work collaboratively quite often. I'm typically the cinematographer for her project. She's the director. And you came to me with the idea of Esfuerzo. And this was when, maybe like a year into like our relationship as friends. And just talk a little bit about that film and how that was the first foray into doing something that's bigger than just, because I know you started doing some like little adverts, right, for that one company. Maybe if you want to start with that part.
Yeah, so I wanted to say two quick things. One thing that I thought that was really interesting about what you said, I think the skill that I was missing that was kind of like delaying my journey to find filmmaking was actually listening to my own voice and creative intuition. And I think that every filmmaker has to have a creative vision. And if you're not listening to your creative intuition, how are you going to direct a scene or write a story? You know, and so I think that I had to go through certain things in my life. I had to experience life before I realized what my voice was and what I wanted to say to the world. And so I think you're completely right. Some people, are born into it. Like when I was working on the Jonathan Nolan interview for Westworld, he even said that. He was like, I was born into filmmaking because my brother Christopher was just making films and I was a toddler and I didn't have a choice. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, well, that's a lucky family to be born in, a lucky situation. But even for Jonathan Nolan, I was listening to a different podcast where he was saying that he started out in filmmaking with features with Christopher, and now later in his career, he's gotten into premium TV, which is a totally different animal. So even for him, his creative vision and his creative intuition has changed throughout his career. There's always going to be phases for people, whether you're starting in filmmaking or maybe you try this. And I think he was planning to go to law school at one point. He went to Georgetown. His wife is a lawyer, and now she's also a showrunner. So there's so many different aspects of filmmaking, and if you can gather those lessons from your life in so many different ways, it's just going to make you a more prepared filmmaker to deal with actors, deal with producers, deal with the emotional stress of what it takes to make a movie. you know? Okay, sorry, what were we going back to? You
Oh,
wanna talk
no,
about-
I think that's all very spot on.
Okay.
Yeah, and even just, we could talk about this all day, but there's
Yeah.
something in just being cognizant of life when being a filmmaker, because everyone thinks that it's constantly having to do stuff, but some of my favorite filmmakers like Malick or even Andrei Tarkovsky, they weren't always about making a film every year. Sometimes it's about letting the film make itself, and then it comes out and you live life in between. But I wanted to know more about your first starts in filmmaking, which you were with that advertising company, or maybe it wasn't advertising, and then you went into Esfuerzo.
So this is how it happened. So I quit Goldman and I was going to start writing. And I started writing for these different tech companies. And one of my clients asked if I could do a video. And I was like, oh, sure. Like, I'll figure it out. And so I hired a local DP in Utah. We shot this video. I wrote this script. I managed the edit. And I just I fell in love with it because I was able to tell the story of this company, and everyone says that, even as a corporate video, I felt so emotionally connected to this work more than what I had felt at Goldman with all the numbers and everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it really started for me. And then from there, I was figuring out, how can I get more of this? How do I do more of this work? What is the potential for this? And I wanted to be in the filmmaking industry, but I didn't exactly know how. So I started just doing all these other corporate clients. I was writing, I was doing marketing consulting, I was doing social media, and I was in LA and I was networking, and I would meet people like directors and producers and people that had a lot more experience than me, and I would just try to learn from them. I would volunteer at their companies or volunteer on their shoots, and I just needed to learn the language of what is this? How do you do a call sheet and all this stuff? And that was kind of the beginning of my education. And then luckily I met this producer from HBO who's a production manager for HBO, and she did those BTS interviews for a number of years, and she opened the door for me. She introduced me to Shane and Filmmakers Academy, to you, to Zach, to this whole Filmmakers Academy family content team. And that was really the impetus for all of this, is I had been starving for a community of people who were willing to share their knowledge. And I met so many people in LA that were this is exclusive. You didn't go to film school? Okay. And when I met the Filmmakers Academy team, it was so different. I felt so welcomed. I didn't feel judged. I was just I felt like I could learn, I could study. And my favorite thing was to honestly hear you and Zach talk about stories and scripts. And I would just watch movies with you guys, and I would hear you guys comment on everything, and you would talk about the look and the story and the characters and what drove you. I remember I started borrowing a bunch of books from you. Mm-hmm. Zach gave me some books, and it was I felt like my filmmaking journey was very much a peer-related journey where I just, fell in love with the journey of learning, and I was so lucky to have friends near me that were open to sharing. So that's how Esfuerzo came to be, because it around this time I was okay, now I've met all these amazing people. I've met the Filmmakers Academy team. I want to make a film. And this story had been brewing in my mind for a really long time. Again, I feel all of my stories begin with something from a long time ago. But when I was a kid, my dad would drive me to school, and I lived in a very agricultural area, and it would be early in the morning, and we would always see field workers, and they were picking the broccoli, picking the strawberries. And he would look back and tell me almost every day, Elena, these field workers are the backbone of California. Without them, we would have nothing. We wouldn't have a state, we wouldn't have food, we wouldn't have economy, we wouldn't have anything. And that always stuck with me so powerfully. And there was a deep respect that just built within me for that. And then it was around this time, 2016, 2017, I felt the stories I was seeing in the media about field workers were not correct. It was very binary. It was judgmental. It didn't show the nuance. It didn't show the history and the emotional journeys of what they were going through. And I had this idea in me for many years of I wanted to pay tribute to them. I wanted to say thank you somehow. And around the same time, I met this family, the Flores family in Solvang. And their story of the grandfather and the grandson creating wine together just really jumped out to me. It was magnetic. And I was I think this is it. I think this is what I've been thinking about for many years. I want to tell this story. So for me, it was a story that emerged, and I was ready. And that's kind of how it happened.
And So you met this family. What was the next step for you getting Esfuerzo off the ground? Did you start writing the story, or was this something that you started collaborating with Zach on? I can't remember how that played
So
out.
I didn't. So when I met the Flores family, what we did first was a lot of research. I went up to Fidi. I went to visit Fidi once with my sister. We took a lot of pictures, and I listened, and I just kind of took in the vineyard and everything that he was doing in life. And then you and I and Zach and Bob went up on a trip, and it was a research trip, and we just asked a lot of questions, and we brought the camera, and we just listened again. And so we were this was all our first documentary. You know, we didn't really have professional training in documentary. We were just curious about this family story. And so we needed to ask a lot of questions. And then there was another time, I visited them a lot to get to know the family and understand what they were experiencing until we decided, okay, we're going to go and film. And then the filming itself was a total adventure, which you could have never predicted anyways.
Absolutely. So now you go through the filmmaking process. This is your first short. It's a documentary short. You wrap this up. What did you learn? And as that was closing and you felt like, all right, I'm ready to take on another project, which was Chewed Gum. What was that thought process like? What was the feeling of, okay, I've started to learn how to become a director, which Esfuerzo was actually like exceptionally executed. But now you had the idea of doing Chewed Gum, which is a feature film, completely different beast, not based in Los Angeles. Now you want to shoot this in Utah without giving too much of the story away just yet. What was your mindset as a director as you started to realize, well, this project is closing and I need to do something else? I want to do something else. Did you know at that time that Chewed Gum was going to be the next project? What was your process like?
Yeah, so again, when I had left Goldman Sachs, when I left Utah, and I left the Mormon church in 2015, I had a distinct feeling that I needed to tell this story of what I had experienced in Utah, of becoming Mormon and the sexual violence that I experienced in the state. And I knew I needed to tell this story, I just didn't know how. And so that was kind of always brewing in the back of my mind. Everything that I was learning, I was like kind of waiting for the right moment. And it was actually funny that you bring that up of like, how did I know I was ready to start this next feature? Because I remember it was like right after post-production was pretty much done. I think I was working with this amazing composer, Adam Weiss, and like I had such a good experience with him that I was like, I can't wait to do more of this. And I was watching Going Clear on HBO, and I was like, there's another story, and I think I'm ready. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about the idea. It was brewing inside of me. And then I started talking about it to Zach, my husband, who's a writer. So once I started talking about this idea more, instead of just having it brew inside of me, I think I started to get that encouragement to go and pitch it. And it was around this time, I think very shortly after, that I met my producer, Liz Marsh. And so it all kind of happened at once, where I was ready because I had listened to my creative intuition, made Esfuerzo, learned how to do it, and now this other story that was brewing inside of me for like 15 years was now ready to be started.
And Chewed Gum is a very personal story, and I want to outline the events that happened so we can start talking about how we executed this project. But even going back before filmmaking, you were a golfer. And that's something that you were looking to be a professional golfer. You were getting offers to go collegiate, do D1 golf. And I would love to navigate that story of where it all started through golf, going through BYU, the events that transpired, and how that ultimately is being crafted into the story that you're now in post for.
Yeah. So basically, yes, you're right. Chewed Gum, it's a documentary feature film. It's a story that blends a number of elements. It's a personal story, it's an investigative story, and it also covers other survivor arcs. So a lot of different things. But I wouldn't be making this film if I hadn't experienced it, because otherwise I wouldn't have known about it at all. So I'll start at the beginning. Yes, I was a golfer. I started golfing when I was like 8 years old. My grandfather taught me how to golf, and it was kind of his gift that he gave to me. And I, golfed for years. It was my goal to play college golf. I played every day after school, practiced all the time. Like, that was my entire life. I wasn't really allowed to go out with friends as much or do this. That was my whole world, to play golf in college. And so in high school, I was being recruited by Columbia University. I went to go visit Boston College. I was recruited by them. And honestly, my grades my senior year were not as great. I kind of had that senior year slip. And so some of the, like Columbia saw that, Boston College saw that, they were like, we can't accept your senior year GPA. And so I was kind of at a place where I was like, shit, like, I don't know where I'm going to go to play golf in college. And BYU reached out to me at that time. It was March of my senior year, which is really late for a student athlete to get an offer. And I went and visited. It was ranked in the top like 15 in the country for Division I golf. And so I was like, I've got to go. Like, this is my chance. And like, I didn't know much about Mormons. I really didn't know anything about Mormons, but I was very open-minded. And like, I was always religious as a kid. So I had gone to an all-girls Catholic school. I knew what it was like to go to religious school. So I was kind of just like open to it.
And did you scout out BYU? Did you go check out the campus? And what were your thoughts when you visited that whole area for the first time?
Honestly, the mountains, it was in April and they were covered with snow. So, I mean, my first trip to Utah, it was amazing. Like, we were driving through the Provo Canyons through Sundance, and I was like, is this the Lord of the Rings? Like, this is gorgeous, you know? And like on the campus, everyone's so happy and smiling and friendly. Like, it was a very good vibe, and like, I felt like I wanted to be there, you know? So I decided to go.
So your first year, you accepted the offer. You went to BYU.
Yeah.
What continued to progress?
So I get to BYU, and I realize it's a little bit more strict than I thought, right? So it's 99% Mormon. I'm a Catholic. You know, all my other friends from high school went off to like the East Coast. They're partying. At BYU, there's no partying allowed. We have something called the Honor Code, which is based on the LDS religion, the Mormon religion, and has rules like you can't drink, you can't smoke, no parties, no coffee, no tea, no premarital sex. Like, everything is very like stringently watched at BYU. And it's like, I was very surprised at how seriously the students were taking it. Like, I heard people talking about it constantly. Like, people were watching other people and turning them in, like, if they were doing something bad. So it was very much like in the ether. And I went to the Honor Code office a few times because I was Catholic, and they interviewed me. And so I already knew that it was like a thing. Like, the Honor Code office is there and they're kind of watching, you know? So that first semester, I went to a party and I was drinking and I was raped that night. And I had heard the stories from other girls about reporting to the Honor Code office and then getting expelled, because if you're drinking and you're raped, that was what had happened. And so I knew, I mean, I was an outsider there. I didn't know a lot of people, and I couldn't say anything. I mean, I just spent the last 10 years trying to play golf in college, and I was afraid of losing my spot at BYU, losing my spot on the golf team. Like, I just didn't even have the words to like talk about it or report it. And I was afraid of getting expelled, you know? And so from there, like, I had a lot of PTSD and nightmares and anxiety.
Did you feel like you had anybody to turn to after those events?
No. I mean, and this was also a time in our culture where like, it was way before the Me Too movement, like rape and sexual assault wasn't even talked about. You know, I remember kind of learning about it in high school, but it was one of those things that, thankfully with the Me Too movement, I think a lot of us are a lot more aware of like, okay, like this is the definition of sexual violence. But I think before that, many people just didn't know that if you're drinking and you say no and then you freeze and you're black out, like that's rape, you know? And I think many people have experienced that. It's not just like, I think like something like 90% of people don't report. Mm-hmm. So my experience was actually very common, and that, but I just didn't know it at the time. I had no idea. And like everyone at school was also talking about like marriage and the law of chastity. So it was a very like, I was very much an outsider in a community that I didn't know. And so I didn't know if I was safe to report. So I didn't.
So the events happened. And then from what I know, you didn't know what the next move was going to be. Did you continue playing golf?
Okay, so the PTSD was kind of tough. I did play golf still, but I kind of stopped trying. I just like didn't have the sense of self to keep going. It was like I had this big secret that I was living with, and it kind of like eroded everything in my life. And so I feel like, you know, that's why reporting is so important, you know, and we know that now. But what ended up happening was about a year later, the Mormon missionaries came to my door and they told me if you're baptized, you could be healed from anything. And at that point, knew I needed help. Like I really needed some help dealing with this PTSD. And I thought, well, this is my answer. Like I'm going to join this church and I'm going to heal. I'm going to have a second chance at life. And like, I'm going to be able to just forget about this and move on.
And being in a predominantly Mormon area, did you stand out? Did they know that you were non-Mormon?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I remember my first week there, people knew by talking to me that I wasn't Mormon. And it was like the way that I talked, and I think I cursed a little bit. A lot of my peers at BYU didn't curse at all. And so they could kind of tell just from my language that I was not of the church. And I think even some of my clothes, like maybe I had like a bra strap showing or something, or I was showing my midriff. And it was really hard to fit in with this Mormon community and all of these rules and like cultural norms that I didn't know about. So yes, I was, even in my second year apartment when the missionaries found me, everyone in my apartment complex knew that I wasn't Mormon. Like if you're an outlier at BYU, like it's known.
Mm-hmm. So what happened after the missionaries came to talk to you?
So they came to talk to me and I decided to get baptized, and I was baptized. I called my parents. They were like, what? Like, and again, like I'm the kind of person where if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it. So I did, and I committed to it. And, I was like the most obedient Mormon girl I could be. Like I thought, okay, I'm going to commit to this new life with the same fervor I approached it as I did with golf. I was very dedicated, and like I wanted to follow all the rules. I went on a mission to the Philippines, and I came back and I was a teacher at the missionary training center. Like I was so dedicated to the religion, and I wanted to embody it. I believed it, and I wanted to share it.
So as your time progressed, you were a Mormon through all for the remainder of your uni time, right?
Yeah.
So you graduated school, and how long were you a Mormon, and what ended up being the events that got you out of being a Mormon?
So I ended up being Mormon for about 7-8 years, something like that. So I went to 5 years of BYU, and with a 2-year break to go on my mission to the Philippines. So it was like a little bit longer at BYU than usual. And like I got this advice from one of my bishops that I needed to stay in Salt Lake and find a husband. He was like, you can't move somewhere without a lot of Mormons because you need to get married. I was like, okay, I'm going to go work at Goldman and find like my Mormon husband. It's going to happen, right? And like again, like this idea of intuition, creative intuition, whatever you want to call it, like I was at Goldman and I just felt like something was missing. And I started traveling to New York City actually around this time because I had a lot of coworkers in New York and they would send us on trips there. And I remember feeling like so free when I was in New York, and I would go to these museums, like the Guggenheim was my favorite place to go. And there were just so many ideas being expressed that I wasn't seeing in Utah, and it made me think, it made me explore, it made me think about like, what else is there? What am I missing? Like I had been starving for like intellectual discussions, like art, culture, and just like different roles of like what a woman could be. Like in Utah, it was like very binary, like you're gonna get married. And in New York, I saw women doing everything. And I wanted to do that, And like, thank God for New York, honestly. New York City, like that, the energy of that city helped me realize there's more to life and I wanna go experience it. And it woke me up to filmmaking too. Because there was a lot about the energy of the city that made me feel like there's more professionally that I can do. Like there are people who are artists and they're succeeding.
Mm-hmm. So is this when you started questioning the Mormon faith?
Yeah.
And explain leading up to, when did you decide to leave the church, and what was leading up to that, the final like, okay, I need to get out of the Mormon faith, the LDS church, and I'm going to start chasing a different path in life, which then will lead you into chewed gum.
Yeah, I mean, so those years in Salt Lake when I was working in Goldman, I loved my Mormon congregations. I had so many amazing friends. It was so very social. Like you go to church and you meet everyone, and it was incredible. You have a built-in friend group. And so there was a lot of good in the community that I really loved. And even I had some friends there. We'd go and see indie movies together at the theaters, and like, so I had some like cool Mormon friends, but like I would sit in church and I just started thinking and asking questions. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with all of this. And I don't know if I can ask these questions and still live this, so it was just like these questions I started asking. And like, there were these things that came out, like the church officially published that Joseph Smith had 40 wives. And wasn't super comfortable with that. And so that was like one of the impetus for me leaving. But I mean, I'll be completely honest. What really did it for me was I went on a trip to Patagonia, actually. And I went with this guy who I had a huge crush on. It was like a Mormon crush. Like, we never kissed, did anything. But I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Patagonia. This is like a romantic, like, adventure together. And like, maybe he'll be my Mormon husband, you know, because that's what was on my mind my entire 20s, is finding my Mormon husband. That was like the thing in Utah. And I went on this trip, and we go backpacking for miles for 2 weeks. And I get a really bad injury. So I come back and I get this really bad plantar fasciitis. Like, I can't run anymore. And I'm having all this time where I'm just at my apartment and I'm trying to recover. It took like 2 or 3 months to recover, like, the injuries in my legs because it was so intense. And I thought to myself, I was like, why would I do something that was so, like, for someone else? You know, I realized in that moment I wasn't living for myself, and then I couldn't stay anymore, you know? And so it was like at that moment that I realized, like, I've been living for the last 8 years, like, ignoring my intuition, ignoring my personality, ignoring my rape. And like, I can't live like that anymore because it's hurting me, you know? And so that's when I decided, I was like, I have to learn how to, like, make the next step, and I just have to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, I started hiking in Utah. I started going to movies on Sunday instead of going to church, like reading books and like opening my mind again. And it was like an incredible journey to leave. But yeah, and when I came back to California, I realized I think I had a unique experience that isn't common, and I need to tell this story.
And that brings us to the beginning of Chewed Gum. So now that you have this story, which is very different than what a lot of people go through, you went through this experience, this unfortunate experience. You went through this time which it's interesting, which we'll talk more about. You went through that experience, but then became a Mormon, spent time away as a Mormon, left the church. Now you're in Los Angeles. And you really wanted to tell this story. How did you get the balls moving? You had a swear zone, and that had very successful reception. You piggybacked off of that a little bit, and you met Liz, which is the executive producer of Chewed Gum. What were the first steps, and when you thought, all right, I want to tell this story, what was inspiring you? Was it initially always going to be a documentary? Did you think maybe this could be narrative? And what was some of the inspiration or directors that you turned to really help cultivate these ideas?
Yeah, great question. So I remember I had this finished cut of Esfuerzo, and I was shopping it around. It was my calling card. I was sending it to producers. I wanted to make a series about wine. And someone introduced me to Liz, and she loved wine. I wanted to have some wine with her. We met in an Italian restaurant. And, you know, it's funny. She almost left the restaurant. I was sitting there. She didn't see me, and she, like, walked off, and I had to, like, go back and find her. But eventually we were sitting together at the restaurant. So I'm sitting with this producer, Liz, at the restaurant. We're talking about this wine film. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to pitch my story to her and see if she wants to make this other documentary, because I want to, but I've never pitched it to anyone. So I pitched my story to her. I told her what happened, and she was like, yeah, like, let's make this film. And so it was the first time I had pitched it. I had never even met her before, but I just implicitly trusted the situation. And we began our producing, directing relationship. And, you know, we started to learn about each other. She got an idea of my story and my vision. And so around this time, a lot of other women from BYU had come forward to the media. And they were featured in the New York Times because these women had reported their sexual assaults to BYU, and they were expelled. And so I had these articles that I was sending to Liz and this research that I was doing, and I was tying everything together to figure out, okay, how do we start? And I wanted to do a documentary. I wanted to tell the story of what had happened for this rendition. I think that, like, this story could be other versions in the future, and I'm still, like, open to that. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I wanted to make a documentary. And Liz is a documentary producer, so that's where her expertise was. And so we decided, okay, we're going to go to Utah and meet these women. Like, I went to Utah, started filming heard their stories, heard the power of what these women had gone through in their own stories and with their bishops and church leaders and how it had affected their lives. And honestly, it was an incredible experience because it was the first time that I was sitting with these women, understanding that they went through the exact same thing. You know, they had also gone through something that they didn't know how to talk about, and they froze, and they felt bad about themselves for freezing, you know. And then I met this detective who told me every sexual assault victim freezes usually. You know, there's freeze or flight, you know, and most always it's freeze. And so here I am, like, hearing these stories from these women, doing these interviews, verite scenes, and then also meeting these experts, detectives, sex crime attorneys in the who are active in the Mormon church. I'm just connecting all of these dots and investigating and trying to understand why is this happening in Utah. And throughout all of this, I was also learning how to make an independent film, because I had made Esfuerzo, which is a short film, but that's 1 weekend of filming, right? You know, you film for 4 days and that's a short film. And with Chewed Gum, it was different. You have a feature film, you have so many multiple different shoots. It's expensive. How do you raise money as an unknown director? How do you get anyone to believe in you? You know, there's so many obstacles that I could have never foreseen, but I was so excited about it and I knew I needed to tell the story. So I just kind of like met each one the best I could. And I tried to put all of my skills that I had learned from past in my career to this particular project.
And how did you, as a director, trying to tackle such sensitive subject matter, knowing that some of these interviews are going to be extremely tough for the interviewee? You know, you're interviewing them, you're talking about the experience, and you're going into it having a similar relationship because you understand partially what they're going through. Everyone's experience is a little bit different. But how did you make sure that they felt comfortable, knowing that this is going to be a safe space? We're going to be documenting you. It's not going to be easy. But how did you, as the director, always try to ensure that there was a safe space, that they had a place to talk, and that you got the most that you needed for the documentary?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's really important to think about, too, because I think there's a lot of documentary procedures that can be kind of extractive. Like, people go into a community and they say, I'm going to take this story. And if they don't have an understanding of it, you can actually end up hurting the people that you're interviewing, right? So that's not what you want as a filmmaker to do. So with these women that I met, I would always reach out through email or phone call, something like that, and I would share my story with them so they would understand why I'm making this film, why I want to meet them, why I want to talk with them. So I always led with, like, being very open with them so that they could feel comfortable being open. And if they felt like they were drawn to it, I feel like that's where our trust kind of began, you know, and we had that same shared experience. So there was so much, we wanted to connect with each other because we had been so alone. Honestly, I didn't really always feel like I was filmmaking. I felt like I was meeting these women who basically taught me how to heal from this experience. So I went into that with that mindset of, like, I'm gonna hear them out. And, like, in the interviews, there were definitely times where, like, you have to be very sensitive. Like, is this person needing a little bit of time? Do they need a break? You know, making sure that they feel really ready. And that's something that I can't always know what's in their head. I can't always anticipate. And so I would ask questions like, how are you feeling? You know, and trying to make them feel as comfortable as possible. And I think it's really important to even, you know, to ask those questions, like, how are you feeling? Are you comfortable sharing this? And if you're not, that's okay. You don't have to.
And I know from the filmmaking process, and we can talk a little bit more about the creative of what we tried to capture as a team, but when we went in, we wanted our footprint to be as small as possible. We didn't want to say, all right, you're going to sit in this chair, let us dial lights in all day, let us set the camera, hey, look here, look there. We knew that sometimes we're only going to have a short window because these people might not be able to last long in the chair, and we had to be cognizant of the time that we had with them. And that's where we started figuring out, like, what the lighting package is. And I remember when we first started, remember how much equipment we would bring, and we're like, oh, we're going to use all of this, we're going to have a crew. And then we realized when we got in some of these situations, wait, we can't do this. We're being way too disruptive. We're being way too overbearing with our footprint. And we had to dial it back significantly. We had all of these different lights. And eventually what we ended up doing was getting a Light Mat 8, which is a larger source, and some diff, and then setting a camera, finding windows, and really using practical lights to our benefit, trying to shoot during the day, but sometimes we had to shoot at night. And that was one of the things I know you and I both learned in real time, was the significance of not being overbearing in a space. Because it comes across. Or we tried to get them to come to us and set it up and say, yeah, if you just come to us, then they just sit down, which was another tactic that we learned. And I want to go to the creative aspect of it, because you came to me and you said, I want this film to feel cinematic, but at the same time to feel extremely personal. And this is where you're still learning cameras. We did shoot with Red Weapon Dragons on Esfuerzo, and that's what we started with on this. But you said you really wanted nice lenses, sharp lenses, stuff that's going to be great for interviews. And we did somewhat of like a lens test for this. We ended up going with the Leica Summicrons. And was there anything specific that you were looking for to get out of the image, or what you wanted? Because you talked about verite a lot. I would love to know what your inspiration behind verite and really injecting that into this documentary.
Yeah, and so with, like I was saying, some of the original like films that had really drawn me into filmmaking were these investigative stories like Silence of the Lambs. Like, one of the major series that actually inspired me for the feel and the look of Chewed Gum is True Detective Season 1. And the reason I bring that up is because there's a personal story, an investigator who's gone through something traumatic, and he's also investigating something that there's a deep rabbit hole that he just keeps going into, and he can't, like he's uncovering so much about a community of women who are being harmed. And so I felt myself so much in that series. I appreciated how they nodded to religion. They really took a lot from the area. I think it was shot in the South. And I just felt the similarities to this. I feel like Utah itself is it's a breathing organism, right? There's just a vibe of Utah that kind of is irreplaceable. There's the Red Rock deserts, the mountains, the forests. It's such a rich land, and yet there's also this community of, very hyper-conservative religion, right? So you have this contrast, and I felt like that's going to be really interesting to see on the screen. We filmed a lot of the temples. We filmed a lot with the Utah Red Rock Desert. So having those images contrast each other in artistic cinematography with the Red Gemini, I mean, it's incredible to feel that paradox of what it's like to be in a place with such rich nature and that also this incredible structure. And then going back to the verite, I think a lot of these investigative verite moments, there are a few moments that we have with journalists that are pretty much my favorite, where we're discovering things in person with these individuals that we're filming with. And so you're really, when you're doing verite for a documentary, you're really on a journey with that subject, with that character, and you're in the moment. You don't know what can happen. And like you were saying with, making the package as small as possible, like, you can prepare as much as you can for a shoot, but then if something's happening, you just got to turn on the camera. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what camera it is. It doesn't matter if there's a light or if it's dark. You've got to capture that moment because the moment could be gone. And so I think like what was so interesting about this film is we have all of that. Like, there's one shot I remember that you and I got where we saw something and I was like, oh my God, Brendan, we have to get that. And you were like, got the camera, turned it on, and we got the shot. And it's like one of my favorite shots. And I'm not going to go into what it is because I want to save it for when the movie's released, but sure, that's like how we got it. There's mm-hmm. no way that could have been planned. It's just you had a camera, you turned it on, and you captured the moment.
And that's the beauty of Chewed Gum, at least from my perspective, was we planned, but Esfuerzo, we kind of went from Esfuerzo into Chewed Gum pretty quickly. There was a short window there where you had the whole Esfuerzo experience. You went through the festival, but then all of a sudden we were going to Utah. We were actually started shooting stuff in Los Angeles first. And what was fun about Chewed Gum, which maybe this is the case for the next documentary that we do, but it was moving so quickly that we were learning on the fly, and I really did enjoy that. From when we started to all of the equipment that we had to shooting on primes, then we went through so many different lenses. We used the Leica Summicrons, we used the Fujinon Cabrios, which were great. We used the Ingenue Easy Zooms. Those were a little bit later because those were lighter and we needed to have those up in Utah because we were constantly moving around. but it was a constant dance because we were a small crew. And I think what worked really well for us is we were all friends, willing to learn from each other and say, okay, I might not be in camera department, but for like Bob, for example, or Zach, who helped us out, they pitched in. And we had a couple of crew members that we would work local with up in Utah. Patrick Newman was one of the cam operators and essentially like a second DP in certain points because we'd have to pair off. And I think that's what made it fun for us, is we were constantly living in the moment and there was not a lot of time. We were always moving. It was exhausting 2 weeks for the block that I was there, and I know you had a block prior to that. So my question would be, as you started to get through the film, and let's just say you shot over a year, different portions,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we've been making this for 4 years. But yeah, we had a block in California. We went to Utah. We had another block in Utah. So it just depends on like documentary financing. But yeah, it's been a few years.
And now you're in post-production. What has that been like? What have you learned during this process?
Yeah, so post-production has definitely been the most enlightening form of documentary storytelling for me. I think that when you're preparing for a documentary production, you can do as much research as you can. You can collect all the data to interview a journalist or an attorney. You go and ask them, you hear their answers. But then when you're in post-production, you need to find the story. You need to figure out how to tell this story in the most cinematic and quick way possible because you only have 90 minutes. And for me, there was so much information that I wanted to convey at the beginning of the post-production process that I was making like a 10-hour movie, and you can't do that. You only have 90 minutes, right? So I think what I learned the most in this post-production process is figuring out what are the most important moments in your footage that tell the most powerful story with your characters, and how do you embed that in a character journey for your audience. And so it's taken many iterations. Like post-production has been a totally different animal. A lot of people say that a documentary is written in post-production, like the editor is the writer, at the end of the day, because it's true. You go and you film a documentary and you have all these moments that you could never expect. And then you have to take those moments and put them in order and make them into a story and find the themes and the deeper emotions and character arcs of what's happening in those moments. And I think what I learned the most in post-production for Chewed Gum was the value of studying other films and studying those storylines and those character developments and how to tell a story without any words at all. We have so much of this beautiful Utah cinematography, and I've definitely grappled with that for the last 2 years of how am I using this in a poetic way to talk about sexual violence and trauma. And it's not simple, but it's kind of ambitious. And it's been something that I've really had to grapple with of how do I take this artistic cinematography and turn it into something that the audience can understand? And how do I pair that with an investigative interview with a journalist? How do I make all of this relate? And so it's definitely been a journey. There's been a lot of ups and downs. I think that, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't edit at all. And in the pandemic, I started watching a bunch of documentaries and just studying them like crazy, reading as many editing books as I could, just so I could understand the language of how is this different than conducting an interview? How is this different than writing a script? And you have to learn that editing language, which can only happen in an editing bay when you're grappling with all of this footage and you have to make decisions.
And now that you've spent so much time in editorial going through those revisions, I want to know what the ultimate vision for Chewed Gum is and what you want the audience to take away watching this film. It's extremely personal to you. You spent a lot of time not only learning about yourself through the events, but as a filmmaker and an artist. And I remember where you started to where you are now. There's night and day different people. You're still Alana, but there's a maturity that was derived from that you weren't cognizant of. And maybe you were a little vulnerable and adverse to facing, but now that you've spent so much time with this subject matter and you've faced it and you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, what do you want the audience to take away looking at you and looking at the film?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things for people to take away from this is it's actually very simple. It's like if you've experienced something dark, you need to speak about it. And on its most basic level, I feel like every human being in the world goes through things where they don't want to talk about it. They are too scared that someone's going to judge them. They're too scared they're going to lose something if they talk about that thing that happened to them, whether it's trauma, sexual violence, or just a bad experience they had. Like, people don't like to talk about that. And I think my experience in making this film and also editing the film and finding the most powerful themes is that confronting the darker situations and experiences leads to growth and transformation and transcendence. And you have to go into that shadow to emerge and create something more beautiful. And I think that there's a catharsis that is taken from something like that. And that's what I've discovered the art of this film was for me, was the catharsis of healing. You know, like hearing these women talk about their experiences and realizing it was okay for me to talk about it too, and that I could be okay, you know. And it's been a 16-year journey. I mean, there were so many years where I didn't say a thing about what I experienced. And not only that, like, I didn't know how to talk about it. And now I'm in this position where I've seen so many other women who have gone through it, you know. And so for me, this whole film has been about confronting the dark shit. You know, this whole film has been about confronting the darker experiences and turning it into art, turning it into something better, and kind of taking your experiences and saying, like, I'm not going to accept that for the darkness that it caused in my life. I want to turn it into something. And that's the catharsis for me. And so I hope the audience will go on this journey with me and experience the personal story, see those investigative storylines, the survivor character arcs, and see the humanity and the transcendence and growth that can happen when you talk about these dark things, when you talk about your trauma and sexual violence. Like, there's so much growth that can happen, and healing, you know, not on only an individual level, but for a whole community. You know, my hope is that many people in the Mormon community see this and they want, you know, to pursue change and healing, you know, and I'm hoping that it's relatable on a much larger level than just Mormonism too, you know, because we all go through things.
And what I always loved is that you still want this, even though it's tragedy wrapped into this film, there's this underlying sense of optimism that you wanted to embed in it, and you never wanted to completely paint a negative picture of the LDS Church.
Yeah.
Because what's great about you is your level of empathy. Even when looking back at that, you have a fond memory of being part of the Mormon faith that you don't want to distinguish and tarnish and try to erase from your identity. That is always going to be there. You might no longer associate with them, you might no longer practice the faith, but you don't want this documentary to say that anyone that's a Mormon, you're bad. Because it's just not the case.
Exactly.
Some of the nicest people that that I've ever talked to were in Utah when we went there, in terms of accommodation, going in these people's homes, even the ones that were struck with some of the tragedies that we've talked about today. They were still such beautiful and accommodating people, no matter what happened, in considering all of those facts. And that's what I loved about this documentary. Even though it's not done yet and you're still molding it, has always been that consideration of, like, all right, but who are we talking about? Is that the primary focus? How can people learn from this and not only just, like, demonize every instant and saying, like, the Mormon church needs to be dismantled, or the LDS church? You did a really good job of painting the larger picture that actually needed to be talked about, rather than just boiling it down to these binary aspects.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because it's true. I mean, my time as a Mormon means so much to me. I was Mormon for like 7-8 years, and I loved it. I had so many friends in the community. I worked so hard to be a good member of the church, and I had such incredible experiences, life-changing experiences. You know, you can't replicate that experience of going on a mission, you know, and knocking on people's doors every day, getting rejected, and then praying with your mission companion to try to figure out, what do I do next? It's like, it's very character building, and it tests you, you know, and I have so much that I can look to the Mormon church and say, thank you. Thank you for this experience. And that's how I feel. I'm grateful for my time as a Mormon. And I would say that that's also been a difficult part of telling this story, is trying to understand, okay, my fond feelings for the Mormon faith, and trying to separate that from what I experienced and some of the more harmful things and the policies that were not as helpful. You know, because when you're in a community that you love so much and you're so passionate about, you don't want to see the things that are not as helpful. You don't want to see the harmful policies and cultural patterns. And so I really spent all those years as a Mormon, not allowing myself to even go there, not allowing myself to think about it. And so I think now I'm in a place where I can really see both. Like I see the whole spectrum, and it's not binary. It's not black and white. It's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of love for the Mormon church inside of me. And there's also, you know, a desire for accountability. And I think both of those things can live together. And I'm hoping that that's what people gather from this film.
Absolutely. So what is next for Chewed Gum?
Yeah, so we actually have a really exciting announcement. My film Chewed Gum got into a documentary pitching contest. It's called Doc Pitch at Docklands, and we are going public. We have a pitch video. In the video, you know, you can go and watch it. You go onto this website and watch our pitch video, and if we win this audience award, we can win $45,000 and finish our edit. So it's kind of a big deal. I'm really excited. I still don't even feel like it's real because I've just making this for so long that I'm just really excited. This has been the first time that I'm actually sharing this film with anyone besides like us. Mm-hmm. So this is a big deal to be in this pitching competition, and we're going to be up for this audience award. That's $45,000, and if we are able to win, then we can go into this edit and complete our film. So,
and what are the details on this competition? When does it start?
We just got into this documentary competition. It starts April 29th and it goes through May 8th. And if you go to the website and you vote for our film, then we can potentially win the audience award. So those are the details. The website is Doc Pitch. Mm-hmm. I will send you the link. But yeah, that's basically it. So anyone listening, watching can go and check it out, check out the pitch, see some of our footage, see the trailer, see some of the stories. And if you like it, give us a vote. We'd love that.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure to add the link to our bio. So definitely check that out. We would love any support that we can give to Chewed Gum and Alana and everything that she's been putting behind this film. It's been a 4-year endeavor, like she's saying, and it's been quite a journey. And now that you're at the closing stage of Chewed Gum and reflecting back on it, what was the biggest challenge and learning lesson for you that you took away from this process, knowing going into whatever your next project might be? What is the one valuable piece of advice that you would give any filmmaker walking into their first documentary film?
Wow, one piece of advice, Brendan? That is so hard.
Or you can give a little like monologue here, but...
Oh my God. I mean, making an independent documentary is such a beast. You know, like if I was to go back and help someone like get started, I would just say be open-minded. Find collaborators that you can trust and listen to them, because you're not going to know everything. You know, you are going to have to learn from the masters, and yes, it's your first feature film, but you've got to really listen and collaborate and pay attention. And I think that the collaboration in this project is where it grew the most. You know, there was at no point where there wasn't an idea or a story or an interview being discussed with all of us, you know, and all of us wanted to understand what was happening. And I think that that's the true value of independent filmmaking, is the collaboration. You know, it's not a solo journey. And I think that, you know, for my next film, that is definitely something I'm going to lean even more into. It's like you want to surround yourself with creative people and then be open to their ideas, because you never know when someone can have an amazing thought for an image or a piece of music even, or a sound that just completely transforms the documentary. It's a team effort. You know, you're never going to know everything all on your own. That's just not how it works. You know,
Sure.
Like I think the director is really just like the organizer of everyone around them. And like, it's important to have a vision and you have to stick with your vision. That's actually another thing. If I were, for my next film, I'm going to be much more intentional about the vision from the very beginning, the artistic vision. I think we experimented with a lot of elements for Chewed Gum. And I think knowing going into a shoot what you do want to capture and then still being flexible is great. But you do want to have like a really clear lookbook and vision from the very beginning that you can turn to and just like have as like a creative Bible, you know? So I think it's like that mix of being very flexible and collaborative, but knowing your vision and being able to defend it. So it's kind of a paradox, this advice is like but you kind of get it, right?
Yeah.
How would you paraphrase that?
I would say, no, that's all on par. And even a step further, the parts that I don't think you're as cognizant about is your sense of curiosity. You're a very curious person, which I think especially if you want to be a documentarian. All filmmakers need to be curious, but a documentarian, you want this sense of, I need to know more. I need to know more and exhaust every avenue to constantly be painting that bigger picture. You need to stay curious and not feel defeated. And what you're exceptionally good at is this willingness of, I don't know, so I'm going to ask. Which a lot of people are like, well, if I don't know, that means that I'm not good. No, there's a difference there. Being good is not trying to give yourself the time to ask the right questions and the willingness to learn and knowing that you're going to fail. But once you fail, that's where you've learned the lesson to be able to reapply that for your next attempt. And curiosity, the willingness to fail, the willingness to ask questions and continuously try, that was the best part of the process of Chewed Gum, was seeing you fail a lot, but not give up. And I think everybody that goes through their first big feature, especially if you're the director, you're essentially going to be making decisions without knowing if they're the right choice. But eventually you'll find a place of confidence where your voice starts to grow. And that's what you're talking about. Next film, I want intention. I know that there needs to be intention behind every choice that essentially builds cohesion in the film. And sure, Chewed Gum might have some moments that, okay, there's a lack of cohesion here and there, but that's not from a lack of trying. That's you trying different things that ultimately are building your voice for when whatever this next film is, you'll be like, okay, now I know exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting part of it.
Yeah, you captured it.
Yeah.
Wait, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So what was the thing that you learned from like documentaries and filming and just the process of independent filmmaking that maybe like enlightened you or changed your perspective on filmmaking in general, whether it was the story or the process, or like what did you take from it? And would you make another documentary?
Yeah, I love documentary. I think, well, you know me, I come way more from like a narrative world. You know how much I love cinema, just being a cinephile and really studying it. What it helped me learn is to dial back from that in need of everything having to have like to be my way. And not in the sense of like a directorial standpoint. It's like, okay, well, I need this because this is what it means. In a documentary world, especially how we were shooting, we were always on our toes trying to react. And sometimes like, no, I need the like, this needs to be the focal length and I need the lighting to be good, but you have to be okay with the ride and let go of some of the variables that just aren't in your control. And that was a really good learning lesson for me, to just kind of be present rather than thinking in a more mathematical sense of filmmaking, which I can definitely do sometimes. Because when I direct something or shoot something that's narrative based, I always consider like rules of engagement. What does this composition mean? What does it mean when you use this focal length? What does this color temperature add to the story? And I love that in a documentary world, a lot of that, it's not that it doesn't matter, it definitely still matters, and it depends on what the project ultimately is. But I love that there was a sense of freedom that came from this, and I had to learn that it's okay to have that sense of freedom. And yeah, it's just fun. It's a different pace. It's way more like of a journey in terms of how we were on the road all the time, and it's smaller. I loved how it was a bit more collaborative, where the departments and the compartmentalization of narrative film sometimes can be suffocating, how divided everybody is. Not that they aren't working collectively as a team, but you know, there's grips. There's the lighting department and there's the makeup department. We blur the lines, at least on this documentary, where we had to help each other, and I think that's very fun. You know, where, don't get me wrong, I think there's a reason why you have to have this militaristic style of filmmaking and narrative, because there's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of variables at play. But it's also fun to just enjoy the process and not worry so much about who's doing what. It's the benefit of the film and coming together and saying, all right, we're going to pitch in and do this family style. I know I might be the DP, but yeah, like, hey, throw that lens on there. What do you think looks good? I have to go help do the audio stuff. Patrick, I'm going to trust you. Like, have fun with this. And being able to relinquish some of that, like, duty to say, okay, we're all in this together and we'll fix it. You know, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest, part for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like you can, and I feel like this is true even in big narrative productions, you don't know what can happen during a day. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to be so flexible as a filmmaker in any production, but I think documentary really taught us like how flexible to be and how to have that emotional intelligence to react in those different situations, which I think has made me personally stronger for these other big productions like HBO Max, BTS stuff. You know, if I didn't do the documentary work that I do, I don't think I would be able to handle these bigger productions. And it helps me understand narrative filmmaking in a different way too, because I know that there's a much different approach that requires so much more preparation for the story and everything. But yeah, I feel like, yeah, our documentary was a family effort.
Absolutely.
Team effort.
And how can people keep up to what you're doing, your other projects that you're working on? I know you're on Instagram. Where can people stay up to tune with you?
So I'm on Instagram at Alana Maiello. I have a website. We're also starting a website for the film, chewedgumdocumentary.com. So you can go there, sign up for a mailing list, and we'll send you emails. And yeah, I mean, just follow us there, follow Filmmakers Academy. And follow Brendan to see what his photos and next directorial projects will be. We're always coming up with stuff.
Absolutely. And is there anything else that you would like to let the audience know about your films, upcoming projects?
Honestly, I would just say, like, the one thing that I was thinking of, if you're thinking about starting documentaries or anything and you just want to get into it, just find a camera and do it. And I know that advice sounds so basic, but you really just have to start. You know, like you cannot start your lifelong journey of filmmaking if you don't just do it. And you don't need to have like 10 feature scripts written to become a filmmaker. You need to go out and film something. And you're going to learn so much from that first experience, and surround yourself with creative, talented people who are willing to learn. You know, join the Filmmakers Academy Facebook group. Find other people who are on there who want to tell a story and want to learn together. You know, it's about finding your people who can help each other. And vote for us in the competition, the doc pitch competition. The Chewed Gum documentary is on there. It'll be there from April 29th to May 8th. So if you vote, we could potentially win an audience award and finish our film. So there we go.
That was amazing. Make sure to like and subscribe, follow Alana. There's definitely more to come. And as always, it's been a pleasure. And thanks so much for all of your hard work in bringing a story like this to light. Continue trying to navigate this world, which is extremely hard as a filmmaker, but I know all of your hard work is going to pay off. And I'm super stoked to see Chewed Gum once it's all said and done.
Oh my God. Thank you, Brendan.
Absolutely. Well, make sure to like and subscribe, everyone. There's more conversations to come like this, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye,
Ayo.
everyone.